So how could today's announcement impact your wallet, and what could it mean for the Canadian economy? Let's bring in Tyler Meredith to break it all down. He's the former head of fiscal and economic policy for former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He's joining us live in Victoria. Tyler, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Let's start with your reaction to today's announcement. It is Canada matching U.S. tariffs, dollar for dollar, almost $28 billion. What do you make of this dollar for dollar response?
Well, I think we actually have to put dollar for dollar in context here. So it's the same amount of trade flows that come across the Canadian border from the U.S. that are going to be tariffed, so about $27.6 billion in Canadian dollar terms. But it's not necessarily in every one of those categories the same tariff rate as what the U.S. is imposing on us in the other direction. And that's important because it may mean that in the end, when we add all of those things up, and this will evolve obviously as consumers and trade flows change in response to this trade fight, that we have a slightly lower initially tariff rate on the U.S. than their tariff rate on us. But that's actually not something that's, I think, problematic, because it gives us room to ratchet that up over time if, as we know, as the president has indicated, they intend to retaliate further. So Canada has some firepower here still left in its magnum that it can potentially use.
Do you think that it had to be, we can quibble about whether it'll exactly be the $28 billion, but do you think it had to be a dollar for dollar spirit of retaliation?
Absolutely. And I think the Prime Minister has hit that mark. I think that the important thing here is that if you look at the regional footprint of where this is going to bite, this will bite in parts of the northeast of the United States, places like Maine, New Hampshire, et cetera, Michigan, that are not only, states that are important swing votes in this upcoming midterm election, but also are the base of the manufacturing capacity that the U.S. is trying to revive with these actions. And so I think you will see a fair political impact of this to the president. And that's going to come in the next number of weeks as we get closer to the election. I'll be very interested to see what, for example, Senator Collins has to say in Maine as to the impact this will have in terms of fish, which is very important to people in her race and in her state where she is likely to lose her seat. And we can also expect potentially in Michigan that the Democrat is going to potentially be successful there. And that, again, is a race that Trump needs to win.
How will this affect everyday Canadians? Canadians who are facing cost of living concerns when they go to the grocery store, when they go to buy something?
Yeah, look, so I think in some of these categories, there are obviously Canadian substitutes that will be available, and I would expect that Canadians will be ever more fervent in their Buy Canadian spirit that we've seen play out in the Canadian economy. And so if that's the case, the price impact to consumers may actually be somewhat modest. There are going to be some potential imports, things like smartphones, where there isn't a Canadian product that's available. So it will have an impact on prices that Canadians pay. But I think we're all probably at this stage resolved to want to pay those tariffs as an act of defiance against Donald Trump. In terms of what this means for the actual worker and for firms, I think it's important to keep a couple of things in mind. The first is, initial estimates before this tariff list came out were that about 100,000 jobs potentially in Canada could be at risk as a result of the tariffs by the United States. That, if it played out exactly that way, if 100,000 Canadians lost their jobs, we would probably see the unemployment rate tick up closer towards 7%, which is not an unheard of level, and it's more historically normal compared to where the unemployment rate was about a decade ago. But that's still a significant impact for a lot of Canadians. And I think as you look at these worker and firm level supports that the government has rolled out, the job that they're really trying to do here is two things. They're trying to help firms pivot towards new markets where they can and to provide the degree of financial support to do so. And I think the Trade Diversification Fund the government announced today is super interesting. And the second is they're also trying to, and this was a key lesson from COVID, to keep people connected to work as long as possible before they actually find that they're unemployed. Because even though the overall demand in that firm who's affected by these tariffs is going to fall, we got to try to bridge that worker potentially to the other side of what is after the Trump administration.
I want to play a clip from Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne and get your reaction to it.
It's making sure that the industry that have been impacted can compete in the Canadian market. And this is the essence of all my colleagues saying, the Buy Canadian policy makes more sense than ever. That's what is driving the $7.5 billion. This is all about mettre chez nous, as we say in French, making sure that we support the people for as long as it takes with what it takes so that we can cross that bridge to days where we won't have to deal with these tariffs.
So for Canadians worried about their jobs, how much protection does the $7.5 billion support actually provide?
Well, I'm not sure that it's necessarily protection in the sense that, we are operating in a different world. We have to accept that. The question is, how do we adapt to that world? So one of the key things that this package does is it provides ongoing funding to be able to do what's called maintenance activity at a number of plants. So if you think about an aluminum smelter, for example, right, that has previously had a significant amount of its demand going into the United States, it needs to continue to be able to fund upgrades to that facility, whether or not it's going to send the product to the United States or Europe. And so that's about buying time as it tries to find new markets. And so providing funding right now to be able to maintain that capital activity at the plant rather than to simply shut down or to wait until this particular tariff response stabilizes is going to keep people employed. And that's really what we're trying to do here is I think we have acknowledged for as long as this trade war has gone on, not only for the last year and a half, but even going back to the first Trump administration, we have to reduce our reliance on the U.S. market. But our ability to shift towards new markets isn't going to come as quickly as just signing a new free trade agreement. As the Prime Minister goes around the world signing all these free trade agreements, that's important. But behind those free trade agreements is going to require businesses to find new customers abroad and to make different things for those new customers abroad. And that requires us to invest in our industrial capacity to shift to those new markets.
What do you think is going to happen next? Do you think that this is going to escalate in terms of the American response? And then will that require an escalation on this side of the border? Could that mean energy is on the table?
So I'd say a couple of things. First is, as I said at the beginning, it's actually useful that the government has kept a bit of powder dry here that it can use at a later point in time. So it's not playing all of its cards. The second is I think it's been very useful that the Prime Minister, including in the language he used in his press conference over the weekend, was very cryptic about the next set of things that government could potentially use. I mean, he didn't dismiss the idea of energy. He didn't dismiss the idea of some of our non-tariff cards that we can play. I've previously talked about whether we want to bring the fact that Canadians hold a significant amount of U.S. treasuries in their investment accounts into this mix potentially, because we know that the cost of debt for the U.S. government is becoming very expensive and a significant pain point for the Trump administration. And also, we know that there are, as you say, other tariff measures that we think the U.S. is probably going to employ. And so it's interesting to me that the president chose in his new threat to tariff autos at 50%, to put that beyond the midterms and down the road into January. To give himself some time to see if Canada, if he wants to entice Canada towards a deal, which I don't think Canada is going to take, but he wants to give that possibility, to make that possibility real. And second, because he needs to reassess what the political impact is after the midterms. Then if he is in a weakened state after the midterms, Canada is in a very good position to be able to ride this out.
Tyler, always good to talk to you. Thank you. That was former head of fiscal and economic policy for former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Tyler Meredith.